My name is Emily Carter. I am 24 years old. I work as a junior marketing coordinator for an outdoor apparel company in Denver, Colorado. If you met me today, you'd probably describe me as independent, reliable, and maybe a little too cautious. My coworkers think I'm the kind of person who always has a backup plan. My friends joke that I never leave home without checking my phone, wallet, and car keys at least twice. They have no idea why. People don't become careful for no reason. Sometimes they become that way because one terrible day taught them that the people you're supposed to trust the most can leave you with absolutely nothing. For me, that day happened during what my mother called a family bonding weekend. At the time, I still believed she genuinely wanted us to reconnect. I couldn't have been more wrong. My mother, Karen Carter, had planned a weekend road trip through western Montana. She insisted it would be good for the family to spend time together away from work phones and the distractions of everyday life. My stepfather, Steve Carter, agreed without asking a single question, just like he always did. My younger half-brother Logan was mostly excited because he planned to record the entire trip for social media. He carried his phone everywhere, convinced every family moment deserved an audience. Looking back now, I realize I should have recognized the signs. My mother was unusually cheerful that morning. Logan kept exchanging little smirks with her whenever he thought I wasn't paying attention. Even Steve looked uncomfortable, gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual, though he never said a word. About 4 hours into the drive, we pulled into an old bus terminal just outside a tiny mountain town. It was the kind of place you would miss if you blinked, while driving by a faded building, a handful of empty parking spaces, and endless pine trees stretching toward the mountains. "Emily," my mother said with a warm smile, "would you mind running inside and getting me a coffee?" "Of course," I replied. Just as I reached for the door handle, she held out her hand. "Leave your purse here. You don't need to carry everything inside. I'll keep it safe." I didn't think twice. My phone, my wallet, my driver's license, my debit cards, even my apartment keys. Everything was inside that purse. I handed it to her, smiled, and walked into the station. Less than 3 minutes later, I came back outside, holding a large black coffee. That's when I saw our gray SUV, slowly pulling away from the curb. At first, I assumed Steve was simply moving the car. Then my mother's window rolled down. She leaned out with a smile that still haunts me to this day. "Good luck, Emily," she shouted. "Let's see if you're finally capable of surviving on your own." Logan burst into laughter from the back seat, pointing his phone straight at me. $20 says she starts crying before sunset. The doors locked. The SUV accelerated onto the highway, and within seconds, my family disappeared, leaving me completely alone in the middle of nowhere. What I didn't know then was that their little family challenge was about to expose a secret my mother had spent 24 years trying to bury. I wish I could tell you that what happened at that bus terminal came out of nowhere. It didn't. Looking back, that afternoon was simply the worst chapter in a story that had been building for years. Ever since I was a little girl, my mother believed that struggle built character. At least, that's what she always said. Whenever I was disappointed, she called it a lesson. Whenever I was hurt, she called it preparation for the real world. Whenever I cried, she told me I was too sensitive. If my younger half-brother Logan broke something, it was an accident. If I made the exact same mistake, it became proof that I wasn't responsible enough. That was simply how our family worked. Logan was the funny one, the favorite, the kid who could do no wrong. I was the one expected to understand, to compromise, to forgive. My stepfather Steve rarely raised his voice. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't brave either. Whenever my mother crossed a line, he would lower his eyes and pretend not to notice. Silence became his way of surviving. Unfortunately, it also became mine. By the time I graduated college and found a job in Denver, I had already learned to keep my expectations low. I paid my own bills, I rented my own apartment, I rarely asked my parents for anything. Still, I kept showing up to birthdays, Thanksgiving dinners, and Christmas gatherings, because a small part of me believed things might eventually get better. Every time my mother invited me somewhere, I convinced myself that maybe this time she genuinely wanted to spend time together. That hope is what put me in the SUV that Friday morning. A week before the trip, my mother called me. "You're working too much," she said. "We're driving up to Montana for the weekend. Just family, no stress. It'll be good for us." For a brief moment, I actually smiled. I imagined hiking through the mountains, sharing meals together, maybe even having one honest conversation with my mother that didn't turn into criticism. I should have known better. The morning we left, Logan was unusually excited. He kept checking the battery on his phone and making jokes about filming the greatest family weekend ever. I assumed he meant hiking videos. Now I know he meant something very different. The drive itself was almost peaceful. We left Denver before sunrise, stopped for breakfast in Wyoming, and crossed into Montana shortly after noon. The farther we drove, the fewer cars we saw. Eventually, the highway narrowed into long stretches of road, surrounded by forest and mountains. It was beautiful. It was also incredibly isolated. A little after 3 in the afternoon, my mother suddenly pointed toward an old bus terminal just off the highway. "Let's take a short break," she said. Steve pulled into the nearly empty parking lot without asking why. There were only a handful of cars, a weathered station building, one vending machine, and miles of wilderness surrounding us in every direction. Everything about the place felt strangely quiet. As soon as we parked, my mother smiled at me. "Emily, would you grab me a large black coffee?" "Sure." I reached for my purse. "Leave it," she said casually. "You're only going inside for a minute." I hesitated. "Mom, my phone." "I'll watch it. Nobody's going to steal anything." Steve kept staring through the windshield. He never looked at me. Logan was already holding his phone in his hands, trying to hide a grin. I should have listened to my instincts. Instead, I handed my purse to my mother, climbed out of the SUV, and walked toward the station. Inside, there was only one employee behind the counter. I ordered the coffee, waited less than 2 minutes, paid with the cash my mother had handed me before I went inside. Then I walked back through the front doors. The moment I stepped outside, something felt wrong. The SUV wasn't where I had left it. It was already halfway across the parking lot, slowly heading toward the highway. I frowned and started walking faster. "Steve!" I called. No response. Then my mother's window rolled down. She leaned halfway outside, smiling like she had just told the funniest joke in the world. "Good luck, Emily," she shouted. "Time to prove you're finally independent." Logan laughed so hard he almost dropped his phone. He pointed the camera straight at me. "Don't stop recording," I heard him say. "This is going to be hilarious." The SUV accelerated. Within seconds, it reached the highway. I stood there holding a cup of coffee that was already beginning to shake in my hands. I kept waiting for the brake lights to come on. They never did. They drove away without looking back. And that was the exact moment I realized. They hadn't forgotten me. They had planned every second of it. For several seconds, I couldn't move. I just stood there in the middle of the parking lot, staring at the empty stretch of highway where my family's SUV had disappeared. Part of me still expected to see brake lights, a U-turn, anything. Nothing happened. The only sound was the wind pushing through the pine trees and the distant rumble of thunder somewhere beyond the mountains. I looked down at the paper cup in my hands. My mother's coffee. I had actually remembered to ask for extra cream, exactly the way she liked it. Without thinking, I dropped the cup into the nearest trash can. My hands were shaking. "No," I whispered to myself. "This isn't funny anymore." I hurried toward the edge of the parking lot, hoping maybe they had stopped just around the bend. There was nothing. The highway stretched for miles in both directions, almost completely empty. One pickup truck drove past without slowing down, then another. Within minutes, they were gone too. I reached into my jacket pocket for my phone, before remembering it was still inside my purse. My purse, my wallet, my apartment keys, my driver's license, every bank card I owned. Everything was gone. I turned and ran back inside the terminal. The woman working behind the ticket counter looked up from her computer. "Ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My family just left me here. She frowned. What do you mean they left? They drove away. With my purse. My phone is in there. I don't have any money. Her expression immediately changed. Did they say they were coming back? I don't think so. She was quiet for a moment before walking around the counter. Let's see if we can figure something out. She let me use the station's landline. The first number I called was my mother's. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Then I tried Steve. No answer. Logan. His phone rang once before the call was declined. A few seconds later, I received the only message they would send me that day. It appeared on the station employee's caller ID screen because she had connected my call through the office system. A text from Logan. Good luck surviving. That was it. No explanation. No, we'll be back. Just a laughing emoji. The woman behind the counter looked at the message and slowly shook her head. I'm so sorry. I forced myself to smile. They're probably just trying to teach me some kind of lesson. Even as I said the words, I realized how ridiculous they sounded. The employee checked the schedule taped to the wall. I'm afraid you've got another problem. What? The last bus left almost 40 minutes ago. I felt my stomach drop. When's the next one? She looked back at me with genuine sympathy. Tomorrow morning. Tomorrow. I glanced through the station's front windows. The sky had turned dark gray. Rain began falling, in slow, heavy drops, covering the empty parking lot with a thin layer of water. The employee handed me a paper towel. I hadn't even realized I was crying. I can call the county sheriff's office if you think you've been abandoned, she offered gently. I immediately shook my head. No, please don't. I still couldn't accept what had happened. Calling the police felt too extreme. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe my mother wanted to scare me. Maybe they were staying nearby. Maybe they'd come back in an hour laughing about how I'd overreacted. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. So I waited. An hour passed. Then another. The station closed for the evening. The employee apologized several times before locking the front doors, explaining that company policy wouldn't allow her to stay overnight. She pointed me toward a covered bench outside, where travelers sometimes waited for the morning bus. As her car disappeared down the road, I found myself completely alone. The rain grew heavier. The temperature dropped. I wrapped my arms around myself and sat on the cold wooden bench, trying to stay dry beneath the narrow metal roof. Cars became fewer and farther between. Eventually, there were none at all. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just embarrassed. I wasn't just hurt. I was genuinely afraid. Because I finally understood something I had refused to admit for years. My family hadn't left me there to teach me a lesson. They had left me there because they believed my fear was entertainment. And somewhere out there, they were probably laughing about it. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the rain to soak the edges of my sneakers. Long enough for the parking lot lights to flicker on one by one. Long enough that I finally stopped checking the highway every few minutes. They weren't coming back. I was beginning to accept that when headlights appeared in the distance. A black county patrol SUV slowly turned into the parking lot. For one terrifying second, I thought my mother had actually called the police on me. Instead, the vehicle rolled to a stop a few feet from the bench. The driver's door opened. A man in a sheriff's deputy uniform stepped out, pulling the collar of his jacket against the rain. He looked to be in his early 60s, with gray hair beneath his campaign hat, and the kind of calm expression that immediately made me feel a little less afraid. He didn't rush toward me. He simply walked over at an easy pace. "Evening," he said. "I'm Deputy Daniel Brooks." I nodded. "Emily." He glanced around the empty parking lot before looking back at me. "You waiting for someone?" I hesitated. It sounded unbelievable even in my own head. "My family left." He frowned slightly. "They're coming back." I don't think so. He studied my face for a moment. Then he noticed I had no luggage. No purse, no phone, nothing. Mind telling me what happened? Something about the way he asked made it impossible to lie. There was no judgment in his voice, no impatience, just concern. So I told him everything. The road trip, the coffee, my mother asking me to leave my purse in the SUV, Logan recording with his phone, the laughter, the text message. I expected him to interrupt. He never did. He listened quietly until I finished. When I finally stopped talking, I realized my cheeks were wet again. I wasn't even sure whether it was rain or tears anymore. Deputy Brooks let out a slow breath. So they knowingly left you here without your phone, your identification, your money, or your keys? Yes. And you're from Denver? Yes, sir. He shook his head almost imperceptibly. That's a long way from home. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he asked a question I wasn't expecting. Do you have any relatives nearby? No. Anyone in Montana? Not that I know of. He nodded thoughtfully, though something about my answer seemed to catch his attention. I'm going to help you get somewhere warm, he said. You don't have to. I wasn't asking. For the first time that evening, the corner of his mouth lifted into a faint smile. It'll be easier to figure this out if neither of us is standing in the rain. I couldn't help smiling back. It was the first genuine kindness anyone had shown me all day. He opened the passenger door of his patrol SUV and handed me a clean towel from the back seat. Here. Thank you. As I dried my face, he radioed dispatch, asking them to make a note that he was assisting an abandoned traveler at the bus terminal. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't accuse my family of anything. He simply stated the facts. While dispatch confirmed my name and date of birth through the state database, Deputy Brooks leaned against the side of the vehicle, quietly waiting. A moment later, the radio crackled. My identity had been confirmed. He thanked dispatch and reached to switch the radio off. Then he paused. His eyes settled on me again. Not in suspicion, not in confusion. Recognition. A strange, almost unsettled look crossed his face. He looked at me for several long seconds before speaking. This may sound like an odd question, he said carefully, but your mother is Karen Carter. I blinked. Yes. He looked away for a moment as if trying to organize a memory that had suddenly resurfaced. I haven't heard that name in a very long time. There was something in his voice that made my stomach tighten. It wasn't anger. It wasn't surprise. It sounded more like disbelief. I opened my mouth to ask how he knew my mother. Before I could say a word, he quietly said something that made no sense to me at all. I think... He stopped himself. Then he slowly shook his head. No. Let's get you somewhere safe first. I had no idea why my mother's name had affected him that way. At the time, I assumed they had crossed paths years ago in a small town. I couldn't have imagined the truth. Because the man standing in front of me wasn't just a sheriff's deputy who had stopped to help a stranded stranger. He was about to uncover a secret that had been hidden from me my entire life. Deputy Brooks drove in silence for the first few miles. Not the awkward kind of silence, the comfortable kind. The windshield wipers swept steadily across the glass while the rain continued to fall outside. Every few minutes he glanced in my direction, almost as if he wanted to ask another question, but kept changing his mind. Finally, he spoke. When was the last time you ate? I thought about it. Breakfast. He checked the dashboard clock. It was almost 9 at night. That's too long. A few minutes later, he pulled into a small roadside diner that looked like it had been there for decades. The neon "Open" sign buzzed softly in the front window. Inside, the waitress greeted him by name. Evening, Daniel. Evening, Martha. He smiled politely before looking at me. Order whatever you'd like. You really don't have to pay for me. I'm aware of that. His answer was so matter-of-fact that I couldn't help laughing. It was the first time I'd laughed all day, Over a bowl of hot chicken noodle soup and grilled cheese, he asked simple questions. Nothing that felt like an interrogation. Where did I work? How long had I lived in Denver? Did I enjoy my job? What had I studied in college? Little by little, my hands stopped shaking. For the first time since my family drove away, I felt like a normal person instead of someone's punchline. Then he asked another question. What about your father? I looked down at my soup. My biological father died before I was born. So Steve isn't your father? No. And your mother's family? I've never met them. Never? I shook my head. My mom always said they weren't good people. What exactly did she tell you? Not much, I shrugged. She said they didn't want anything to do with us. I stopped asking when I was little. Deputy Brooks didn't respond immediately. He stirred his coffee slowly. His expression had changed. He wasn't simply listening anymore. He was thinking, carefully. After dinner, we walked back outside. The rain had finally stopped. Before opening the patrol vehicle, Deputy Brooks pulled out his phone. Would you mind waiting here for just a minute? Of course. He stepped a few yards away and made a phone call. I couldn't hear everything, only fragments. Yes. Karen Carter. Can you check an old record? As far back as 25 years? I'll wait. His voice was calm, but I could tell this wasn't a routine call. When he hung up, he remained standing there for another minute, staring toward the mountains, almost as though he were preparing himself for something. On the drive into town, neither of us spoke much. Eventually, we arrived at a small sheriff's substation. He unlocked the front door and led me inside. I've got a break room with a couch, he said. It's not fancy, but it's warm. It sounds perfect. He disappeared into an office, while I wrapped myself in a blanket someone had left folded on the couch. The building was quiet. Only the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional crackle of a police radio broke the silence. About 20 minutes later, I noticed Deputy Brooks walking out of his office with a thin manila folder in his hands. His face had gone pale. He looked at the folder, then at me, then back at the folder again. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Finally, he walked over and sat across from me. Emily. His voice was quieter than before. I asked dispatch to pull up an old public record. I frowned. Why? Because when you told me your mother's full name, he paused. It reminded me of someone I used to know. He opened the folder and looked at the first page. Then he slowly closed it again. I need to ask you one more question. Okay. Has your mother ever mentioned a man named Thomas Brooks? I searched my memory. The name meant absolutely nothing. No. He nodded, almost to himself. I didn't think she had. Another long silence filled the room. Finally, he looked me straight in the eyes. Emily, I think your mother has been hiding something from you for a very long time. At that moment, I still believed he was talking about an old family argument. I had no idea that the answer sitting inside that folder was about to change everything I thought I knew about my own family. I stared at him, completely confused. What do you mean my mother's been hiding something? Deputy Brooks didn't answer right away. Instead, he slid the manila folder across the table toward me. I don't want you to take my word for it, he said quietly. I'd rather you see why I asked. Inside were copies of old county records, birth certificates, property records, a marriage license. Everything had been printed from public archives. He pointed to one document near the top. This is your mother's birth certificate. I looked down. There it was. Karen Louise Brooks. Not Karen Carter. Not Karen Stevens, which had been her last name before marrying Steve. Brooks. My eyes moved back to him. Your last name? He nodded slowly. Yes. I felt my heartbeat quicken. I don't understand. When your mother was 23, he began, she left this town after a terrible argument with her family. He paused for a moment before continuing. She changed her last name after she married. She cut off every form of contact with us. New phone number, new address. She even asked relatives not to tell us where she'd gone. Us? My wife and I. The room suddenly felt very small. I couldn't even finish the sentence. Deputy Brooks took a slow breath. Emily. I'm Daniel Brooks. My daughter is Karen Brooks. And if these records are correct, his voice almost broke, that makes me your grandfather. I just stared at him, waiting for him to smile, to tell me it was some unbelievable coincidence. He didn't. Instead, he quietly opened another document. It was my birth certificate. Under my mother's name was one I recognized, Karen Brooks. The document had been filed before she legally changed her surname after marriage. Everything matched. The dates, the county, the signatures. There was no mistake. I looked back at him. You're serious? I wish I weren't finding out like this. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I whispered the only question that mattered. Did you know I existed? His eyes filled with tears. No. If I had known... He stopped to steady himself. Emily, I swear to you, I would have searched every corner of this country. His words didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded like regret. Real regret. I sent birthday cards to your mother for years, he continued. They all came back unopened. I wrote letters. No reply. I even drove to Denver once after someone told me she'd moved there. He looked down at his hands. The address I was given had already been abandoned. So, she never told you? He slowly shook his head. Not once. And she never told you about us? I couldn't answer, because the truth was becoming painfully clear. My mother hadn't simply distanced herself from her family. She had erased them. Every story she'd ever told me suddenly felt incomplete. Every answer she'd refused to give suddenly made sense. Deputy Brooks leaned back in his chair and wiped his eyes. I've spent 24 years believing my daughter wanted nothing to do with me. He gave a sad smile. And tonight I discover I have a granddaughter I never had the chance to know. Before I could process any of it, a deputy from the front office knocked lightly on the open door. Daniel? He turned around. What is it? The deputy held up a phone. I think you need to see this. Deputy Brooks walked over. His expression changed almost instantly. What happened? I asked. He silently handed me the phone. The screen showed a video that had already been shared hundreds of times online. The caption read, Family Survival Challenge. How long before my sister completely loses it? I pressed play. There I was, walking back toward the parking lot with a cup of coffee. The camera zoomed in on my face as I realized the SUV was pulling away. My mother's laughter echoed through the speakers. Logan's voice followed. $20 as she cries before sunset. Then the video ended with me standing alone in the rain. The comments were pouring in faster than I could read them. Nobody thought it was funny. Not a single person. For the first time since my family abandoned me, they were the ones people were judging. And that video was only the beginning. By the next morning, the video had spread far beyond Logan's social media page. Someone had downloaded it before he could delete it. Then it appeared on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, even local community groups in both Montana and Colorado. The comments were brutal. People weren't laughing. They were asking why two adults would abandon their own daughter in the middle of nowhere, without a phone, money, or identification. Several people tagged Karen's employer. Others recognized Steve from the construction company where he worked. The story traveled faster than anyone in my family could control. Deputy Brooks encouraged me to file an official report, not because he wanted revenge, but because he wanted there to be a record of what had happened. For the first time in my life, someone was telling me that what I'd experienced wasn't normal. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a lesson. It was wrong. Later that afternoon, my phone was finally returned after deputies recovered my purse from a highway rest area where my family had apparently dumped it. As soon as I powered it on, it exploded with missed calls and messages. Most of them were from my mother. The first voicemail was angry. "Emily, this has gone way too far. Call me back immediately." The second sounded frustrated. "People are twisting the story online. You need to tell everyone it was just a misunderstanding." The third was very different. She was crying. "Please answer the phone. We never wanted this to happen." I listened to every message before calling her back. She answered before the first ring had even finished. "Emily," she sobbed. "Thank God. Are you okay?" It was the first time I could remember her asking that question. "I'm fine," I replied calmly. There was a long pause. "Sweetheart, we're so sorry." "No," I said quietly. "You're sorry because people found out." She immediately denied it. "That's not true." "Then tell me something." Another silence. "If nobody had seen Logan's video, if nobody had criticized you, would you have come back for me?" She didn't answer. I waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Finally, she whispered, "It wasn't supposed to go this far." I closed my eyes. That was all the answer I needed. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Not, "We never should have done it." Not, "I'm sorry we hurt you." Just regret that the consequences had become bigger than the prank. "I hope one day you understand why we thought you needed this," she said. I took a slow breath. "For 24 years, I answered. "You kept telling me everything painful you did was for my own good." I paused. "But good parents don't make their children earn safety." She started crying again. "I love you." I believed she meant it. In her own complicated way, I think she always had. But love without protection isn't enough. "I forgive you," I said softly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I have to trust you again." She tried to speak. I gently ended the call. Over the next several weeks, my life changed in ways I never could have imagined. I stayed in Montana longer than I expected. Deputy Brooks, my grandfather introduced me to old family photo albums that had been sitting untouched for decades. There were pictures of my mother as a little girl, pictures of my grandmother who had passed away years earlier. And for the first time in my life, I saw photographs of people who looked like me. The same smile, the same eyes, the same stubborn chin. It felt strange to realize that an entire side of my family had existed all along, not because they had abandoned me, because they had been kept from me. Over the following months, Daniel and I spoke almost every day, sometimes about serious things, sometimes about nothing at all. We were both trying to make up for 24 lost years. There was no way to replace that time, but we refused to waste the years we still had. As for my mother, we spoke only occasionally. Our conversations remained polite, short, careful. The relationship we once had was gone, not because of one afternoon at a bus terminal, because that afternoon finally forced me to see what had been happening my entire life. Nearly a year later, I traveled back to Montana for my grandmother's memorial service. My mother came too. When she saw me standing outside the church, she slowly walked over. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she opened her arms. I smiled sadly. Instead of hugging her, I offered my hand. She looked at it for a few seconds before shaking it. There were tears in both of our eyes. "I'm proud of the woman you've become," she whispered. "I wish I had said that sooner." "So do I replied. She nodded. Neither of us tried to change the past. Some things simply can't be repaired. When I turned around, Deputy Daniel Brooks was waiting beside his truck. He smiled the moment he saw me walking toward him. "Ready to head home?" he asked. Home. For the first time in my life, that word didn't confuse me. I smiled. Yeah. I finally know where home is. When I first heard Emily's story, one thing stood out more than anything else. It wasn't the abandoned bus station. It wasn't the viral video. It wasn't even the family secret that had been hidden for decades. It was how easily cruelty had been disguised as love. There are families who believe that making someone tougher means embarrassing them, humiliating them, or putting them in dangerous situations. They call it discipline. They call it character building. They call it a lesson. But real love has never required fear as its teaching tool. What happened to Emily wasn't a harmless prank that simply went too far. It was a series of choices. Someone chose to take away her phone. Someone chose to keep her wallet. Someone chose to drive away. Someone chose to record her panic instead of helping her. Those decisions weren't accidents. They reflected how little her safety mattered in that moment. The most heartbreaking part is that Emily kept searching for excuses for the people who hurt her. That's something many victims do. When you've spent years being told you're too sensitive or that everything is for your own good, you begin to question your own instincts instead of questioning the behavior that caused your pain. Thankfully, this story didn't end with revenge. It ended with truth, accountability, and the discovery that family isn't defined only by blood or by the people who raised you. Sometimes family is the person who stops, listens, believes you, and offers kindness when you need it most. If there's one lesson to take from Emily's experience, it's this. Love should make you feel safe, not scared. And if someone repeatedly tells you that hurting you is for your own benefit, it may be time to ask whether they're teaching you a lesson or simply asking you to accept the unacceptable.